Good morning, everyone. I'm going to speak to you in English. I understand French, but if you heard me speak French, you would all cry. So I learnt my French from my neighbors in the Haute-Garonne. They were from Marseille. So this interesting Toulousain and Marseillaise accent was not helpful. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm going to look at my notes because I have a habit of talking too much, and this is to stop me doing that. It's a very kind introduction, and I thank you. I'm an executive coach. I run a leadership consultancy, although these days I do more freelance work, and I'm part of Ethical Business Building the Future, which is a global, Baha'i-inspired organization. We call ourselves a learning community. And we're interested in exploring how business can contribute positively to the world. And we believe that business has an important role in creating a just, sustainable society. We have been friends with Jump forever, both intellectually and on a heart level. So it's extremely, I feel extremely privileged to be here today and to join you, so thank you. 40 years ago, I feel a little embarrassed to say that, 40 years ago I was involved in men's groups, and we explored masculinity, our sexuality, our role as parents, but we also supported our sisters in the city that we worked in their endeavours. And we marched alongside them every weekend on a campaign called Reclaim the Night, protesting against sexual violence on the streets. And we ran programmes for girls, and we did gender-focused youth work with boys, and we educated teachers and police officers, and we really believed we were changing the world. 4 decades on, I sometimes despair at how little progress we've made. We still don't have equal pay or gender discrimination legislation that works. And the World Economic Forum has said it will take 100 years at the current rate of change for women to be rewarded equally, and a further 100 years after that for women to achieve the same rights to healthcare, education, and participation in civic life and business. 2 centuries at the current rate of progress. Now, happily today, we are going to hear many inspiring stories and lots of very good and positive news. And let's be clear, this is EBBF's view, unless and until we achieve equality and women participate fully in society, we cannot make human progress. It is impossible. So we all need this. In fact, it's extremely hard to find any justification at all for continuing the existing masculine order. So why, on that basis, is change so painfully slow? I'd like to suggest 4 things that we might look at today. And if we examine them, they may give us some clues about what we can do to speed things up. And although the title of this presentation, I was amused to see it, it wasn't mine, is A Path to Sharing Power, I promise I'm not going to try and give you answers today. No categorical answers. Rather, what I want to do is to ask some questions that might provoke us to think differently, and which I hope will then lead us to have really meaningful conversations during today and learn together what we can do to make change faster. So there are 4 things that I think we could look at. Firstly, I believe we fundamentally misunderstand the nature of humankind. Secondly, today we're talking about power, and when we do so, I think we're using outdated concepts of masculine power, and the language we use traps us and stops us moving forward, because it ignores the real evidence. Thirdly, whilst we have great experiences of men and women sharing power together, I think the way in which we talk about that, the way in which we share that information, actually traps us and keeps us in the status quo. And last, although all of us want to see these changes, I believe that every single one of us behaves in ways, potentially, that leave us stuck where we are now and disable us and slows down the pace of change. So our own behavior is part of the problem. So let me begin with 3 things about the nature of human beings, humankind. And as I say these, I would appreciate it if you would think about where you work and if these 3 things are accurately reflected in your workplace and your organization. We are spiritual beings. Our work has to meet our intellectual, material, emotional, and spiritual needs. And it's only recently, perhaps in the last 400 years, that meeting our spiritual needs at work has disappeared and work's become focused on the material and the intellectual. Prior to that, we understood the spiritual dimension of work. And interestingly, men and women worked together alongside each other. Meeting our spiritual needs means undertaking meaningful work that adds real value. A job that serves a higher purpose was the number-1 requirement of young people aged 16 to 25 in a recent global survey. The number-1 requirement. And this was 160,000 young people in every continent of the world. And when work doesn't meet these aspirations, we become demotivated and even sick. Seeking to serve is the reason why so many of us volunteer when we finish work. Why our voluntary work concerns community good, why we're involved in environmental action campaigns or helping young people. In this respect, women and men are absolutely equal. Our struggle for the word, our souls don't have a gender. We are all on the same path of spiritual growth. Now, whilst we have our spirituality in common, in other respects, men and women are very different. We have different qualities, we have different gifts, and we actually need both the masculine and the feminine in all their glory. Too often, in my view, equality is translated as sameness, or we're required to hide our magnificent differences. This is, as far as I'm concerned, madness. The female and the male are like 2 wings of one bird. We need both to be working fully and equally in order to fly. Otherwise, we just go round in circles endlessly. And finally, whilst we understand globalization of money, of services, of goods, of labor, of information, we have not grasped the simple truth that humankind, the human family, is globalized as well. We have our cultural differences. I'm a Brit, I lived in France, I now live in Portugal, and even in these 3 countries that are so close to each other, I can tell you there are some extraordinary cultural differences. We have these, but they are like a rich palette. Fundamentally, we're the same. It's as if we're different plants. Humankind is, in all our difference, we're like the flowers of one garden. Magnificent, colourful, beautiful and bright, but we're all actually coexisting in the same system. And Many new models of power recognize this. It's a simple reality. Go away. Our global family is much like an ecosystem. It's full of independent and interdependent parts that not only coexist and work in harmony, but have to achieve a balance with each other for homeostasis. It's a dynamic system, and that's what the human family is like. So, power. Once described as America's last dirty word. With the current administration, it's probably true. I enjoyed a great conversation with Annick where we were talking about her being taught philosophy. And she had to read 2 books about power. The Prince by Machiavelli and Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Now, these are both very fine books, but this is a very incomplete reading list when it comes to power. And we hold on to these old masculine models of power and the language that's associated with them. I'm continually surprised that in business we still talk about dominating the market, dominating. We talk about hostile takeovers. We revere commercial aggression. And my favorite, I have to say, is sales penetration. Now, fortunately, more complete, richer models of power stress different values and behavior. And we see a continuum now. We have power over others to dominate by consent or otherwise, and the winning and losing. This is all at one end of the spectrum. The center ground is occupied by what we call power to do things, to act, to achieve things. And then beyond this, we have power with. And this concept of power is mutualistic. And when it's founded in equality, we create synergy, and we learn, and we cooperate, and we collaborate. In recent research, collaborative leaders, both men and women, describe power as neutral, a benign force that enabled them to unlock capacities at both an individual and organizational level. And they said as leaders, their role was to be curators of that progress, of that process. And these leaders and the kind of power they wield is founded on courage, and that's the willingness always to engage with the unknown, humility, never elevating oneself above others, patience, and the willingness to deal not with just the good stuff, but the messy, uncomfortable, awkward things. Being trusting and trustworthy was really important. Selflessness was a quality that these leaders talked about, always putting the organization and the system above themselves, and they all practiced self-reflection. They were brutally honest about their own shortcomings. Now, compared to old power, dominance, penetration, and so on, these are not only healthier traits, but I would argue they are much more feminine. But old power is like old money. It's in the hands of a few, and they don't want to let go of it. They want to keep it. But by doing this, we are right now driving many, many high potential women out of the workforce. And young people, my own kids are included in this, my own children, of both genders are just not prepared to come and work in our corporate madness. They will go and create their own world with a different foundation. So what happens when men and women do share power and are in leadership roles? The surprising thing is there's very little evidence, although we will hear some great new stuff today. But there is very little. But what we do know is this. If you invest money in a business run by a woman, you will get a better return. Companies led by women have cultures that allow whistleblowing to be uncovered and explored more quickly. On the money markets, women are the most profitable of all traders because their egos don't make them overtrade and lose money. And remember, the only Icelandic bank to survive the 2008 crisis had a CEO as a woman as a CEO. We know that if you're in microfinance and development work, funding a woman running her startup is more effective than a man, and indeed the Grameen Bank will only fund enterprises run by women. And peace treaties, this is an interesting one, peace treaties negotiated by women are more sustainable and durable than any other. So, it makes me wonder, if we had more of this data, might we go faster? And I'm not sure the answer is yes. Because when we ask, what is the impact of men and women sharing power, are we unintentionally confirming the idea that power is masculine, that our leaders are men, and therefore we need evidence to support the idea that women enter this space? Now, diversity initiatives, and in my experience, some of the women in leadership programs I've been involved in, too often appear to be about women developing more masculine skills rather than growing their feminine qualities. And for those of us in human resources or learning and development or with a diversity brief, this is a significant challenge. And we all have to try and be aware of these unintended consequences. Given the poor record of men running things, I wonder if we shouldn't be asking different questions. And just imagine how much research we could generate if we wanted to inquire, what's the downside of all-male leadership? We keep people busy for years exploring that. And finally, for all our good intentions, I think we are part of the problem, you and I. We don't intend to be, we're all involved in the same struggle, but I think we fall into traps. And I have 3 examples. The first, with some trepidation, I have a request to make of the women. You are endowed, undoubtedly, with demonstrably better emotional intelligence than most of the men I know, including myself. And your social skills surpass ours magnificently. And the shadow side of these capacities that you have, as you know, is that when you flatter a man or appeal to his ego or even his kind of supercharged sexual prowess, it's a very powerful tool. Right? You can diffuse a conflict, you can swing an argument, and the one guarantee is that if you smile properly, we will all behave like puppy dogs. Right? This is what we do. Right? Now, I want you to stop, because you encourage us to diminish ourselves, and actually you're undermining our quest. Appeal instead to our higher nature, to our spiritual selves, our intellect. Now for the men, I have 2 requests. I feel on safer ground. The Me Too movement, gentlemen, has shone a light on something that all the women in this room already knew about. And we're feeling uncomfortable. Remember, though, that the number of men who actually exploit their power as sexual predators at work is really quite small. But we allow that culture to exist. A lot of us have laughed at a sexist joke, or we've left a comment about a woman's appearance unnoticed, or we've allowed our male colleagues to talk over the women in a room in a meeting. It's about time we stopped ignoring these very small but very corrosive assaults. Stop participating and stop other men doing it. That's my request. I'm not suggesting you patronize the women in the room by speaking for them. You can speak for yourself. All you need to do is say, how dare you think it's okay to speak like that in front of me? That's all you need to do. Having asked you to speak up, I also want you to do the opposite. We need to shut up. We need to learn to listen to the women in our lives. And I mean really listen, with respect. Now, listening is hard work. So I suggest we start by not saying anything, and I suggest our second step is to stop explaining to the women in the room what they really said and what they really meant. And if we can do those two things, perhaps then, perhaps then we can move on to actively listening. Our human family is extraordinary. And our potential to grow and change is seemingly limitless. And that's why, despite our own foolishness, I remain convinced we can make progress. I'm not pessimistic. I'm not optimistic. I consider myself to be a realist. And whether we consider sharing power as a rational thing, a political thing, or as I do, a divine quest, the well-being of the entire human race rests on us achieving it. And we can, and we will, do it sooner if women and men can work together in unity. Thank you very much for your kind attention.